not real life in a lot of ways. So, but you don't know that you don't know who you are, and you don't know that you're wearing a mask, and you don't know that things are not very real. It's just what you know. And so I think we both got really tired of stuffing and just kind of doing what we do, but there was just not a true friendship and true connection. So anyway, for us, year 7, it's kind of everything hit the fan, and we kind of had to decide, are we in this or not? And I straddled the fence for a little while, and then I had to finally make a decision. I went to counseling and got a tremendous amount of healing, figured out who I was, and it was like meeting a new person for the first time. And then my heart was so changed that Jake was like, that must be God, I want that. And so he ended up going to counseling and got a lot of healing. And so honestly, I think maybe year 10, we celebrated our 10th anniversary. It was the hardest trip we've ever taken. It was the most vulnerable place we had ever been, but it was the most honest place. It was just awkward. It's like we're in this. It's not fun yet, but it was like being reintroduced to a new person. I was no longer the controlling, angry, cynical. My heart had gotten tender, and I had gotten able to be led. And Jake, began to really rise up to who he really was as a leader and as a dad. And so you do change, and that's not a bad thing. But you have to go with it and let God sort of bring you along as He does. And everybody's story is different, but there does come a point where you kind of just grow up. You grow up together, and I think when that happens, you just pause and acknowledge, God's doing something in me, and give yourself to it. Don't resist it. I would just say I like who we are. The past 10 years have been like a whole different friendship and marriage than the first 10, and I'm just so grateful to the Lord.
So I think the way that I would answer that question is you can look at change one of two ways. Change is always a challenge. Change is always hard. But if you go into it dreading it of, oh my gosh, what's going to change? What if I don't like that? Well, flip that on its head. And what if you love the changes that are coming? Doesn't mean they're not without challenges. It doesn't mean that they're not without conflict. But if God is growing you and you are changing, then you are going to step into a more full version of who God says that you are. And so, ladies, I'll say this to you because I've never seen an exception to this in all the years that we have been counseling people. Ladies, you have a prophetic view of your husband. And what I mean by that is you see him where he is right now, but you also see the potential for where God wants to take him. You have the opportunity to speak life or death into him through what you see. So choose to speak life. I know that's one of the things that really changed me and helped me step into the fullness of, in this season, who I feel like God wants me to be. But again, you can dread change, or you can have an expectation that God is doing it, He's going to do it, and you might actually like it when it gets there. But ultimately, if you have eyes to see your spouse, yes, as they are, and choose to give grace in the season you're in and love them, but also to see where God is taking you, then what you are doing is you are echoing God's heart for your spouse, because that's the way God sees us. God is not in love with some future version of us, and God is not waiting on us to get all of our junk together before He gives us a stamp of approval. He loves us and He approves of us the way we are right now, but He also sees where He is taking us and what it's going to be to get there. And the great thing is God is way more concerned about the journey than the destination, and so He is willing to take as much time as is necessary to mold our hearts and to grow us into that.
One thing that you said is the conflict and fearing. I think anytime we fear anything, that's when we kind of shut down, or we kind of walk in something that we're not supposed to be walking in. And so Mark and I are completely different people than when we got married. We also got married very young and had to grow up together. Woo! I would say year 1 through 7 was pretty bad. And not necessarily because of Mark, but like just the combination of our messiness. No. But if you will examine the change going on in your heart, it is much harder for you to get frustrated or confused or whatever with the change that's going on in your spouse. Because what the Lord is doing in you is much more important for what you're walking through and what you need to sit in than what the Lord is doing in your spouse. And so I would say for me, when experiencing change, I had to let God be God, and I had to stop trying to, even though the Lord's changing me, I felt like, okay, are you gonna change him? Like, hey, I had to stop, and stop the nagging. And I don't know if any of you've read Power of the Praying Wife, but that kind of just puts your focus in the correct place. Pray for your spouse. Pray that the Lord would change him, that the Lord would move him, and that you would be a willing vessel to help see the potential in your spouse.
Again, ditto, echo all that. Lots of prayer, seeking wise counsel, getting counseling at times, seeking, looking inwards, seeking what the Lord wants to change in you. But practically speaking, 2 books really helped us in terms of understanding each other, so that as change came in us and in our circumstances, we understood where each other was coming from. Personality Plus, Florence Latour. We talk about these books so much that we decided to bring copies of them to show. This helped us, just very practically speaking, understand what makes us so different and what makes up our personality.
We're really different.
Yeah, very different. And then the 5 love languages. You probably heard of that one. And again, both of those books really helped us understand what makes us different, so that when change or conflict or anything comes up that has you scratching your head, you see it differently, you understand it differently. And what we've seen happen over the course of our marriage is, as we seek to change ourselves and better ourselves based on what books like this reveal to us about our strengths and weaknesses and whatnot, we come closer from being polar opposites to being closer to the middle. We're still different, but closer to the middle. And in some ways, we maybe even cost a little bit. Like things like Shauna's on time for things now. And I'm not so mean about it. So things like that.
It's a miracle. Not guilty.
Well, we got married right out of college too, just a couple weeks after college.
2 weeks after.
2 weeks after college. So what I'm thinking about though is that all of your relationships change, not just your marriage relationships with your friends, with your siblings, and all those kinds of things. So it is a constant challenge as you deal with new things in your life. I think one of the things that we tried to do early on was just be interested in what the other person was interested in, and show concern for what they were doing. That's important. And another thing that was helpful to me was that I knew that my parents were praying for me, and I liked other people praying for your relationship. Just made a whole difference to me.
That's great.
Okay. No, I was going to say that, we did get married right out of school, pretty much 2 weeks after. And our life journey started for 4 or 5 years before we were having kids. In fact, we were told we would never have kids. So, surprise! But life changes then, and it was like, not a huge deal. It was a huge deal. I remember the night home, she was in the hospital thinking, my life has changed forever. And it was, in a good way. And so we had 4 or 5 years by ourselves. Then we had the years with the kids, and we adapted and worked with that. Then we had the teenage years, which was different. Then when we retired, it's different because it's still a challenge. I mean, you never really are through with this. I mean, you're still concerned, you're still praying, you're still working with them even at this point. You're not changing diapers. Well, we are, so. But no, it's just part of life, and it's the journey that you're on. And like I said, you just adapt with it, roll with it, or you give up. And to give up, that's just wasn't an option.
That's good. That's so good.
Those are all great, thank you. And Tom, you kind of mentioned the different stages of your children, and that's a good segue into our next question, because a lot of the moms, well, all of the moms here obviously have preschoolers. That's why we're here. So I need you to really think back to those preschool years, the early years with your children, but the different stages, whether it's preschool, elementary, middle, high school, and let's talk about discipline, because that's what we're all trying to figure out here. What works? What were, let's see, your best pieces of advice regarding discipline? What worked for you successfully? Maybe what would you have done differently? I know for myself, with our firstborn, he's kind of the guinea pig, where you're just trying to figure it all out, and you realize you make some mistakes, so you adjust. How can you guys give us some advice on discipline for the different stages?
Go.
Consistency.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I know, we all say that. Consistency, and I think it needs to be something immediate. And then I'm not talking about